Okay, are you sitting comfortably? Then we'll begin. So welcome everyone to Durham 2025. This is our party Marxist school in the lead up to what's going to be the Durham Miners Gala. We are living in a time when an increasing number of people are having their eyes opened that something is profoundly wrong in the world, whether that's the Gaza genocide and seeing our politicians say that that's absolutely fine. But anyone who speaks out against the Gaza genocide is a terrorist. So you kind of take a double take on that, and even as a kind of middle of the road person, you think, okay, so it's fine to murder babies and hundreds of thousands of people in a built-up area, the most densely populated area on earth. But to say it's wrong or to try and stop it happening, you're a terrorist and you're going to go to jail. And then there are elderly women being arrested in Parliament Square as terrorists, potentially able to go to jail for 14 years for holding little signposts that say they might or might not agree with Palestine action, which is now proscribed. And though they went through this process of having a democratic seeming process in Parliament, actually that was neither here nor there, because the real act of proscribing these organisations is done by the stroke of a pen of the Home Secretary. Formerly it was Priti Patel who outlawed the actual vehicles of Palestinian resistance. On this time it was Yvette Cooper. We got a Labour Foreign Secretary who, with the stroke of her pen, outlawed a civil action group. And on the very same day, they got together all the female members of Parliament, made them wear little sashes as if they were like suffragettes, and they celebrated the suffragettes, who, let's not forget, were a direct action group who won the vote for women. Now, we may or may not think that the universal suffrage is the key to democratic representation. What we can really see is that the bourgeoisie have adapted beautifully to the fact that we all have a right to vote, to sideline that entire process, the talking shop of Parliament, and it doesn't come into the play. Nevertheless, they were a group that we're told to celebrate, that are central to our history as a country, who were criminalised at the time, who were put in jail. And you can bet your bottom dollar that every one of those female MPs who lined up with their little sash on would have happily voted to outlaw them and prescribe them as a terrorist organisation. So we're living in a time when people's former assumptions, the things they thought they believed, are being challenged. And what we see with comrades, and we've seen it in a number of instances, is that once the pillars of your knowledge on which you rested your worldview, many of which are constructed in a subconscious way, they're constructed by your experience of going to school and your teachers who are, let's not forget, when my kids go to school and they come back and says, Mrs. Smith told me, they're like held up as a fount of wisdom and a pillar of knowledge that is respected. So the teachers teach the kids think it's true. They're in a respected position. But the teachers are not just free to teach, they teach to a syllabus, to a national curriculum, and that curriculum is carefully curated to a particular worldview. So it's in our syllabus at school, it's in our syllabus at university, it's in our press. It's from the pulpit. It's, of course, from parents and their worldviews, which, of course, themselves are a product of the general environment. So society teaches us certain things. As people come to question that, they knock down the old pillars of their knowledge. And it's a beautiful thing to see, but it's also a very dangerous time, because when you're knocking down the old pillars of your knowledge, you have to replace them with your new worldview. And it's a time of great exploration and meaning, but it's a time when you can go badly wrong. And you have to ask yourself then, what is truth? What is knowledge? What do I believe on? How do I know if someone tells me something, it's true or not true? Can we believe anything? Is there such a thing as truth? Is everything relative? Is all opinion equally valid? And that's another school of thought that we're kind of encouraged to believe. Don't judge anyone. Just let it go. Laissez-faire. Make your way in the world. And don't have a judgment. It's not your place to judge, actually. But just let it go. And we're not subscribers of that either. So we're Marxists, we're the Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninist. We're communists, so we are people who challenge the old order. We want to bring a just society based on the needs of working people. But Marx changed the general movement of socialism into a scientific socialism, and in particular he gave us this theory of knowledge that is dialectical and historical materialism. What does that mean? We're materialists. it means we think that the world really exists, that it's genuine, that it's real. Maybe that's not a very revolutionary thing to say to you, but it challenges the notion, therefore, that ideas are prime, spirit is prime, and that might be your own ideas in your own head, or it might be God. It says actually the world is a material phenomenon, it's real, it's really knowable, and it represents in totality an absolute truth. And that our knowledge as an individual or as a human society is constantly reaching closer and closer to that knowledge. So there's a relationship between what we know and the absolute truth. And in fact, science and the scientific method is part of that. It's acknowledging really that this world really exists, and we're constantly trying to find out more and more about it. And as we find out more and our models become more and more exact, hypotheses have the right to be treated as more and more approximating truth and real until they're challenged by new facts which show that they're incomplete and need to be changed. So there's a process. And the Greeks described this process. So Marx criticized those who were mechanical materialists, who just looked at the world as a fixed and static thing. And he said, not only is it real and knowable, but it's clearly in a process of change. Everything is in turmoil, everything's in flux. Things come into being, they have a period of being, and they go out of being. And that's true whether we look at the life of an individual, of a gnat, of an ant, of an elephant, of a human being, or a species, or a planet, or a solar system, or reactants in a jar. So we see these phenomena of motion over and over again. And Marx said, okay, yes, the world is real and knowable, but also we need to look at things in the process of change, in the concatenation of events, and combine these two aspects of knowledge. And so he took what was Hegelian dialectics, this process of understanding change, and he wedded it, and he saw the power of that understanding, and he wedded that with a materialist outlook. Hegel, of course, was someone who was an idealist, who believed that idea was prime. And because Hegel saw these patterns of motion all around him, what he ultimately came to the idea was that this was the mind, the thought itself. Thought had certain patterns of motion, and it imposed those patterns of motion on everything around him, and that's how he understood it. Marx said, actually, it's the reverse. You see these patterns of motion everywhere, and we'll talk about them in a second, what is dialectics. You see these patterns of motion, actually because the world is real and knowable, and it is matter. It's really solid, existing stuff, but it's matter that's constantly in motion. And because everything is made up of matter in motion, whether very small particles or big agglomerations of matter, then at certain levels you see certain phenomena which are reproducible. And that doesn't give you a kind of a priori knowledge and understanding everything will work according to this handbook, but it's a very useful framework for understanding those patterns of change. So the world is real, the world is knowable. It does away with a lot of the concepts we're asked to believe in, and it challenges religion. And Marxists do challenge religion quite rightly. Marx, in his very beautiful, a couple of his theses, I get confused sometimes whether I'm quoting from the Communist Manifesto or from Ludwig Feuerbach or from his theses on Feuerbach, isn't it? And he wrote some very beautiful things. He said, for example, well-known phrase, everyone knows, religion is the opium of the masses, but they don't know that even the few phrases surrounding it are incredibly powerful. And he says, what does he say? He says, religion is the sigh of the oppressed. Yeah, it's the consolation of the oppressed. It's the consolation of the masses, the sigh of oppressed, the soul of a soulless world. And then he goes on to say, religion is the opium of the masses. And he says, we want to subject everything to critique and reason. And we subject religion to criticism, not to take away the consolation of the masses so they just look at their chains and will endure them. But precisely we want to bring mankind face to face with his real conditions of existence so he can see the chains which have enslaved him. Not that he would live with them, but that he can break them, break the oppression. And that was the whole point of this critique, a critique of reason, and mankind and human beings should actually realize they're the agents of their own destiny. We've really been recently reading Lenin's work in our CADA study, which was materialism and imperio-criticism. And in that work, Lenin was saying, I lost my train of thought. Yes. It'll come to me 1 second, sorry. Oh, I've like totally gone blank. Yeah, it'll come to me 1 second. Yeah, no, I've lost the point. I've lost the thread. Anyway, so
It's basically that you fall into religion every time you concede that, you know, you make concessions to people who want to say that the mind.
no, that was it. It was Bishop Berkeley. It was looking at Bishop Berkeley. So we're talking about matter, weren't we? Matter is real, matter is knowable. And in that work, he starts off with a little analysis of Bishop Berkeley. And Bishop Berkeley was he was a bishop, so he was a religious man, but he was a famous proponent from actually the 17th century, end of the 17th century, of idealism. And he was very frank, and he says, to really get rid of this impiety, this irreligion of atheist doctrine, you have to attack matter. Once you attack matter, everything else falls to the ground. So you have to really go against the concept. And he actually explicitly said, once you do that, you put things back into their proper place, you put the working people into their proper relation to the structures of power, because they never feel that they can question. They receive given wisdom from their superiors, from the priests and the bishops. And we're in, of course, the land of the prince bishops, as we saw when we entered Durham. So these are people who if you've not read Machiavelli's The Prince, it's worth reading. It's worth reading. The philosophy of power of the Middle Ages. It's very cruel, it's very terrible, and they'll say openly, it's better to be an armed prophet. It's good to have a doctrine to control people's mind, and if you control that with power and vicious retribution in a state, then you're really in a position to chain people spiritually and physically. And in this country, people forget that we have lords temporal and lords physical. The people who own the land, and this was the perfect combination, one of the early dioceses in Durham, where the very bishops, the keepers of Christ's doctrine on earth, also had the power, were the land, were the feudal landlords, and kept people in subjection. So the relationship between shackling people's minds, not allowing them to think objectively about their material conditions and keeping them in their place as exploited servants was very direct, and Bishop Berkeley made very constant reference to it. And the point of attacking matter and materialism was precisely to make sure you keep them in their place and you keep them as subjects and serfs. So we do want to attack that. And even George Galloway likes to quote from the Communist Manifesto and say, all that is holy is profaned, all that is solid melts into air. And that is the beauty and the power of criticizing the old feudal relations, that things can change. You don't have to stay in your place. Those who were the ruled can become the ruling class. The mass of the people can take control of their own destiny. But as we go through that process of getting rid of the old ideology, we have to be conscious of what is true. And that's where, again, the power of Marxism comes into look. Because he said, yes, the world is knowable, and we're striving towards absolute truth through a realization of relative truths. But at a certain stage, philosophy was the all-encompassing highest form of knowledge. Love of knowledge literally means, doesn't it? Love of knowledge, love of learning, love of thought. The idea that through joined-up thinking, you could put all other phenomena into place. But bit by bit, actually, natural science has knocked it from the throne, precisely because at a certain stage, and this is the other thing that Marx emphasizes about dialectics, it requires concrete, real study of phenomenon. You can't just come up with a generalization that's divorced from study. If you look at Mao, he'll say, go to the masses, study the masses, understand the masses. When Lenin wanted to write for the workers, he said, go and speak to the workers. He spent hours actually not only preaching to the workers, but studying them, understanding their conditions, understanding the problems they were facing so that he could help to guide them from where they were towards socialism. And any natural scientist will know you can't write a thesis on the nature of an electron or a positron or any phenomenon. You can't write a thesis on the life of birds without actually studying nature, that real knowledge comes from the study of matter. So studying the